And for my science fair project, I wanted to research which of my favorite foods contains the most glucose sugar. My research question was, which of the selected foods will contain the most glucose sugar? And I hypothesized that the pears and apples would contain the most glucose because they contain the most natural sugar. While researching for my project, I found that glucose is the most common monosaccharide found in nature, and in plants it is generated through photosynthesis. When you digest glucose, first it travels down your esophagus to your stomach, where acids and enzymes break it down into tiny pieces. Then the glucose is released. It is then transferred to your bloodstream where it can be stored for energy at a later time. Glucose is very important to fuel many organs in your body. Your brain requires a constant supply of glucose, since it keeps you fueled throughout the day. To test the accuracy of my glucose strips, I first need to create positive and negative controls. I have here examples of the controls that I used in my experiment. I created these cups to show the dilution process of the controls. To test liquids for glucose, I first needed to dip the test strip into the liquid for 1 to 2 seconds and then remove. Then I began a timer for 60 seconds. If the color changed before 30 seconds and stayed that way for the remaining 30 seconds, then I knew that the percentage was over 2%. And since my project only tested between a range of 0.0625% and 2%, I wrote it down as greater than 2% on all my charts. To test fruits and vegetables for glucose, I first needed to cut in half and then rub with the test strip until thoroughly wet. Some foods, such as watermelon and tomato, I could just stick the test strip into because they were softer, then remove after 2 seconds. I began a timer for 60 seconds and the same rules applied for the fruits and vegetables as for the liquids. To test dried fruits and nuts for glucose, I needed to first dilute with a 1 to 10 ratio. I did this by adding 4.5 teaspoons of water and a half teaspoon of food. Then I let sit to let the food soak up the water. I then dipped in a test strip for 2 seconds and then removed. Then I began the same timer and the same rules applied. Here I created 2 charts to show the amounts of glucose. I created a bar graph so that you could clearly see that the Gatorade, watermelon, pears, apples, and apple juice contain the highest amounts of glucose. And milk, pistachios, almonds, peanut butter, cheese, and Ruffles contained none. This is a more detailed chart that includes the type of food, my predicted glucose level, my experimental glucose level, and extra notes on each food. Here I have my test strips that I used in the experiment. My hypothesis was that the apples and pears would contain the most glucose sugar. After testing 21 foods, I found that my hypothesis was not correct, but it was not far off. Apple juice and Gatorade contain the most glucose, and apples contain the second most. You're probably wondering, why did the apple juice contain more than the apples? This has to do with fruit concentrate, which is a form of added sugar. Fruit concentrate is made when all the juice is squeezed out of the fruit and the water is removed from the juice. Then you have fruit concentrate. However, with Gatorade, the answer is much simpler. Gatorade is a drink that is meant to give you energy and hydration. And since glucose can provide both of these things, it is natural that it would contain high amounts of glucose. In conclusion, this experiment is important because we need to know what we are putting into our bodies. This is especially important if you are diabetic, because the amount of glucose in a food affects the amount of insulin needed. In the future, I would like to test more foods and from a different range of glucose levels, and maybe also test for a level of calories. And since macaroni and cheese and potato chips didn't contain very much glucose, now I know that I can eat these all day.